when the average person says, well, how come you rappers didn't read the contract? I said, you did the same when you
bought a car.
I accept on fucking social media.
Yes, or you bought a car or whatever. Like, nobody read all that.
Oh, I don't even read. I just accept it.
Yeah, exactly. So I'm just like,
I ain't got no time for this shit.
We get lawyers if we feel that this person we can trust.
Chuck D of Public Enemy used his platform to call out what he saw as the corrosion of the very culture he fought to elevate. Today, we're counting down the 5 artists who became the focal points of Chuck D's most potent and principled criticism. Make sure to hit that like button and subscribe. Let's get into it. The first on the list of Chuck D's most hated artists is Hammer. The first target on our list represents, for Chuck D, the original sin of hip-hop's commercial dilution, MC Hammer. Now, in the early 90s, Hammer wasn't just popular, he was a global phenomenon. You Can't Touch This was inescapable, but Chuck D looked at Hammer's parachute pants, his dance-heavy routines, and his pop-friendly anthems, and he didn't see a superstar, he saw a sellout. To Chuck, Hammer was the ultimate example of the industry's trap. He was a non-threatening, entertaining black performer who had been packaged and promoted to make hip-hop safe and palatable for white mainstream audiences. He was the image-based artist, the clown, as Chuck would often dismiss him. The message of unity or having a good time was, in Chuck's view, a dangerous diversion from the urgent political messages that groups like Public Enemy were pushing. While Chuck was rhyming about fighting the power, Hammer was dancing in front of cartoonish backgrounds. This wasn't just a difference in style, it was a difference in mission. Chuck D saw Hammer's success as proof that the system would reward black artists who didn't challenge it. He wasn't just hating on the music, he was sounding the alarm about what kind of artist the machine wanted to prop up. It was a warning shot about the commodification of the culture, and Hammer was patient zero. The beef was never about a direct diss track, it was a cold, ideological war waged in interviews and public statements. Chuck D positioned himself as the guardian of the culture's integrity, and Hammer was the prime example of what happened when you traded that integrity for mass appeal. It was a foundational conflict that set the stage for everything that followed, establishing the battle lines between conscious rap and pure pop entertainment. The second on the list of Chuck D's most hated artists is the NWA diss MC Ren and Ice Cube. If the beef with Hammer was about a sellout, the next conflict was a battle between 2 different kinds of militancy. This one gets messy because it involved former allies, specifically MC Ren and Ice Cube of NWA. In the late 80s and early 90s, Public Enemy and NWA were the 2 most powerful militant forces in hip-hop, but their approaches were different. PE offered an organized intellectual revolution, the Black Panthers of hip-hop. They had a structured message, a uniform, and a clear enemy in the system. NWA offered raw, unfiltered street-level reality, the visceral anger of the inner city. Their enemy was often the immediate oppressor, the police officer on the corner. After Ice Cube left NWA, and as the group's members began their solo careers, shots were fired. The tension wasn't just about coast, it was about method. MC Ren, on tracks like Mayday on the Frontline, took direct aim at Public Enemy's revolutionary aesthetic, essentially calling it theatrical and questioning its real-world impact. He questioned their credibility, suggesting their revolution was for show. The implication was that Public Enemy was all talk, while NWA was living the reality they rapped about. Chuck D and Public Enemy did not take this lying down. The response was ferocious.
In my mind, you got to define negative. You know, if I teach you something you don't know, for me, that's positive. You know, if you learn something from a good experience or a bad experience, that's positive. So, you know, they can squash all that.
When you talk about what's really going on, don't nobody want to hear it. You know, they always want to bring up a problem or bring up the excuse that you're talking about violence. But if you just think about it, if you talk about what's going on in life, it's violence and whatever you talk about.
On the remix for Rebel Without a Pause, Chuck fired back with lines aimed squarely at Ren, but the diss track Hitler Day was even more direct and scathing. On it, Chuck didn't just call out Ren, he labeled him and his crew Benedict Arnolds. This was a profound insult. He was accusing them of betraying the entire cause of militant black music. This was a clash of militant titans over who owned the revolution. It was a brutal, ideological civil war. Chuck D saw their criticism as a betrayal from within the ranks, an attack on the very concept of conscious rap from those who should have been their brothers in arms. It was no longer just NWA versus Public Enemy It was a debate over what form legitimate resistance should take.
To get 2 or 3 lines out. So Dre was like, you know what? Everybody just leave. Everybody leave. I'm gonna work with this dude. Came back later on that night. They hadn't even finished the first verse. I was like, damn. I'm gone. I left again. Came back the next day. They was in the middle of the second verse. Came back the next night. That same night, they had finished the song. And it was dope.
Was it the organized, strategic resistance of Public Enemy or the chaotic, visceral rebellion of NWA? This beef cut to the very heart of hip-hop's identity as a voice of protest. The next artist on Chuck D's hate list is the gangsta rap wave, Dr. Dre and Snoop Dogg. As the 90s progressed, a new, even more dominant force emerged from the West Coast, the G-Funk era, led by Dr. Dre and Snoop Dogg. With its smooth, funk-laden beats and vivid tales of street life, it captured the nation's attention. But Chuck D looked at Death Row Records' empire and saw a counter-revolution. While Public Enemy fought the power, the police, the government, the system, Chuck D believed gangsta rap had turned the violence inward. It was glorifying black-on-black crime, materialism, and hedonism. He famously and controversially labeled it the garbage rap wave. He argued it was a deliberate, cynical ploy by the industry to sideline politically conscious rap in favor of something that was more commercially viable and, crucially, less threatening to the establishment. In his view, the powers that be were much more comfortable with rappers who talked about killing each other than rappers who talked about overthrowing the government. He didn't see Dr. Dre's The Chronic as a classic album. He saw it as a dangerous, seductive diversion from the real struggle. The laid-back, weed-smoking vibe of G-Funk was, to him, a musical opiate. It was a soundtrack for complacency. While he was trying to get people to read, to organize, to become politically literate, he saw gangsta rap as encouraging them to just get high, chase a dollar, and perpetuate cycles of violence within their own communities. This was perhaps his broadest and most sweeping critique. It wasn't aimed at one man, but at an entire genre he believed had lost its way and abandoned its duty to the people. He saw the rise of Dr. Dre and Snoop not as an evolution, but as a co-opting of the culture's energy, redirecting it from a revolutionary force into a commercial product that ultimately reinforced negative stereotypes. The next artist on Chuck D's hate list is Kanye West. Moving into the 2000s, a new kind of artist emerged that drew Chuck D's ire, Kanye West. Now this is fascinating because Ye was, in many ways, a successor to Chuck's legacy of sonic innovation. Both were producers who pushed the boundaries of what hip-hop could sound like, but the beef ignited around a specific technological pivot, the rise of auto-tune. During Kanye's 808s and Heartbreak era, he fully embraced the vocal effect, using it not as a subtle corrective tool, but as a central, robotic aesthetic. To Chuck D, a man whose power was in the raw, unadulterated grit of his voice, this was a betrayal of the highest order. Auto-tune was, in his eyes, a gimmick that dehumanized the voice, the rapper's primary instrument. It was the nullification of the noun. If the rapper's voice is the noun, the core subject of the music, then auto-tune was effectively canceling it out, replacing human emotion with digital manipulation. He took to Twitter and interviews.
This rapper named Tekashi 6, right? Yesterday, they're doing a music video with Kanye and Nicki Minaj, and there's a drive-by, right? They shot up the set, and people are saying, look, this guy...
Now, I don't think people should use the culture to drag, the everyday, dysfunctionality into it, man. You got millions in prison right now who are looking at a situation like that kid or whoever and saying, damn, if I only had a chance, I'm locked down because of some dumb shit I did. So you always got to keep in mind who's on that other side who don't have those opportunities.
Blasting auto-tune as the death of our people and the nullification of the noun, he saw Kanye, a fellow producer and pioneer, as someone who should know better, someone leading the culture down a dead-end path of technological dependency over raw human skill and message. For Chuck, the voice was sacred. It was the vessel for truth. To obscure it with a robotic filter was to dilute its power and its authenticity. It was a critique from one innovator to another, a warning that in the pursuit of new sounds, the soul of the music was being lost. This feud was less about a personal vendetta and more about a philosophical divide on the role of technology in art. Chuck D saw it as a crutch that masked a lack of substance, while Kanye saw it as a new paintbrush for a new emotional palette. The last artist on Chuck D's hate list is the mumble rap generation. And this brings us to the final, and in many ways most comprehensive, target of Chuck D's criticism, the entire mumble rap generation. This was a blanket critique aimed at artists like Lil Yachty, Designer, and the wave of SoundCloud rap that emerged around 2016. For Chuck D, this represented the final insult, the logical endpoint of every negative trend he had been warning about for 30 years. It was the abandonment of lyrical clarity, political awareness, and artistic substance all at once. This is when he delivered his most viral modern-era pronouncement. He didn't just critique these artists, he declared them null and void. He famously said, "You can't have a rapper who can't rhyme. It's a cancellation of the noun." This wasn't just about one artist. It was a declaration of war on an entire movement he saw as the endpoint of the industry's dumbing down of black music. If auto-tune was the nullification of the noun, then mumble rap was the cancellation of the entire sentence. The focus on melodic ad-libs over complex lyricism, the perceived lack of effort in enunciation, and the embrace of style over substance was, to him, the ultimate betrayal of hip-hop's foundation as a lyrical art form. It was the culmination of his life's work, a fight for substance that now found itself facing what he perceived as the ultimate emptiness. The hatred here was for the phenomenon itself, a generation he felt had been systemically disconnected from the power of their own words and the history of their own culture. This was his final stand, a patriarch looking at what he believed was the prodigal son who had not just left home, but forgotten the address entirely. Reactions. Now, how did these targets respond to being in the crosshairs of one of hip-hop's most respected voices? Hammer, for the most part, took the high road or ignored the criticism, his massive success acting as his shield. But to Chuck, this only reinforced his point. Hammer was content being an entertainer, not a revolutionary. His silence was seen as compliance with the system. MC Ren and Ice Cube fired back with equal ferocity. This wasn't a one-sided feud, it was a coast-to-coast lyrical war between the two most feared camps in hip-hop, a brief but intense firefight that showed militancy had many faces. They weren't going to let Public Enemy claim the moral high ground unchallenged. The gangsta rap community largely dismissed Chuck as being out of touch, a preacher who didn't understand the realities of the streets they were depicting. They saw their music as just as authentic and necessary as his. From their perspective, they were reporting from the front lines, while he was theorizing from a university campus. Kanye West, in his typical fashion, was largely unbothered, his artistic trajectory unaffected. He was on his own path, and criticism, even from a legend, was just noise. He embraced the controversy and continued to evolve, further cementing the divide between his artistic vision and Chuck's purist ideals. And the mumble rappers, they mostly dismissed him as an old head who didn't get it. Lil Yachty and others fired back with memes and light jabs, proving the generational divide was wider than ever. Their response wasn't with lengthy diss tracks, but with a shrug, which to Chuck's supporters only proved his point about a lack of substance and a disregard for hip-hop's foundational principles. The bigger picture. When you step back and look at this 30-year arc of criticism, a clear, consistent pattern emerges. From Hammer in the early 90s to Lil Yachty in the 2000s, Chuck D was fighting the same enemy, the commodification, defanging, and dumbing down of a radical black art form. He wasn't a hater, he was a conservationist. He was trying to protect the culture from what he saw as a hostile takeover by commercial interests that wanted to strip it of its power. The tragic irony, of course, is that in trying to protect the culture from corporate influence, he often found himself at odds with the culture's own evolving tastes and desires. He was a preservationist in an art form that thrives on change. His battles were never about personal slights or who had the better flow. They were about the soul of the music. Was hip-hop a tool for liberation, a modern-day spiritual and political guide, or was it just another product to be sold, another form of escapist entertainment? That was the question that fueled every single one of these conflicts. Chuck D's entire career stands as a monument to the belief that art and artists have a responsibility that transcends commerce and popularity, viral spread. And in the modern era, these critiques found a new life. Chuck D's null and void comments on mumble rap became a rallying cry. They were turned into memes, used in endless YouTube compilations, and became the ultimate ammunition in online debates between old school and new school hip-hop fans. A new generation discovered his polemics not through albums, but through social media clips. His decades-old arguments with Hammer and NWA are still debated in Reddit forums and Twitter threads. Was he right? Was he an elitist? These questions are as alive today as they were 30 years ago. Chuck D's ideological battles fought in the 90s are still being fought today in the digital comment sections, proving the enduring power and relevance of his critical voice. He successfully future-proofed his arguments, ensuring they would be used to judge every new wave that followed. What's next? /legacy. So where does this leave Chuck D's legacy? It solidifies that he is not just the man who made Fight the Power. He is the conscience of hip-hop, a constant, unwavering critical voice that serves as a permanent reminder of the genre's revolutionary potential and its responsibility to the community it comes from. His music is his monument, but his critiques are his ongoing contribution, a yardstick against which all hip-hop is measured. Conclusion. In the end, Chuck D didn't just hate artists. He hated what they represented at different stages of hip-hop's journey. His battles were a reflection of his profound love for the culture, a love so deep that its corruption was a personal offense. He was the guardian at the gate, and he took that job deadly seriously. Now we want to hear from you. Who do you think was right in these debates? Was Chuck D a visionary protector of the culture or an out-of-touch critic who failed to evolve with it? Debate it in the comments. If you respect the man who fought the power, hit that like button and subscribe for more deep dives into the stories that shape music.